Oh, welcome back to Sunday Science, everybody. Glad you could join us for another awesome week of discovery and learning and everything else that is science on a Sunday. So today I figured we would go through a well, since it is just a brief history of space stations. So obviously, come the 60s, it was very, very eager for everyone that was involved in the space race, i.e. Soviet Union and the United States, to not only get people into space, but to get them to the moon. Well, ambitious goals like let's ignore learning anything about what it is to exist in space. Obviously, you can undertake those tremendous goals and you can make them happen. We obviously did as such. On the other hand, you can take the a little bit more careful route of, hey, let's find out what happens to the human body when it's in space for a large amount of time. So, having Apollo missions successful, obviously the Soviet Union was putting its gears towards space station activity. And I wish I could have found more information in video form as I could about the Salyut program, but effectively the Salyut program is the very first space station system and infrastructure that was ever launched. And it was an absolutely amazing resource. Like I say, it's kind of hard to find video stuff to show you guys because, that's always fun to sit down and watch videos and things of that nature as opposed to just listen to a person sound like a textbook. But there's only so much that video-wise I could find. I'm sure there's a lot of video out there, but it's just difficult to find good video about the Salyut program. But nevertheless, it was the very first space stations to come into existence. Most were short-lived, some were much longer-lived. The end of the Salyut program actually wound up seeing the beginning of the Mir space station, and obviously years upon years of scientific research being able to take place in low Earth orbit. It's low Earth orbit. Absolutely phenomenal. Likewise, in 1973, 2 years after the Salyut 1 was launched, and it had some difficulties, but everything when you're learning how to, go to space, you're going to have some problems. So in 1973, we decided that we were going to put up Spacelab. And Spacelab was sometimes I just have to laugh about it. Other times I'm really not sure what to say. But Spacelab was a very interesting program. Aside from internal mutinies and things of that nature, the entire thing was actually a fuel tank. So, sometimes when you're shooting from the hip, you just wind up with a giant gas tank floating in space. I don't know how else to say it. I can see why there were mutinies. Well, a mutiny, I should say. Oh, man. Oh, you going and playing something already?
Purely accidental. Sorry about that.
No, not a problem. We can go ahead and jump on into it. I mean, there's so much great footage from Skylab. It was a very, very successful endeavor, and
Except for that one
Well,
song.
why don't we just go ahead and watch a little bit of footage about it? Because sometimes you do actually have to watch.
If you like. Okay, that was not meant as an interruption to your talk. I was just moving stuff around on the desktop and clicked twice when once in drag was supposed to happen. So my apologies.
It happens. I'm not worried.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, Skylab was a nice, successful operation for quite a while, except for that whole solar panel thing when they first.
Oh, you know, like I say, there's glitches and errors with all things, and sometimes you have to go and pull a micrometeoroid shield off of your solar panels. I mean,
these things happen. I understand that. Well, all right. Well,
I'm sure that the astronaut community doesn't find it as hilarious sometimes, but
no,
they are the ones risking their lives. We're the ones watching, so it's a lot easier for us to laugh about the faux pas.
Yes,
they actually have to go and do the work.
Down here, it's most humorous. Up there, the smallest thing to us can be life threatening. So yeah, you're right. I agree. All right.
Yeah.
So, would you like to bring on Skylab?
Sure, let's watch a video of a giant gas tank in space with people in it.
Okay, here it goes.
Skylab starts in the dreams of the people who wanted to go into space for a long time, early in the 20th century. We saw people who were thinking about how do we get humanity off the planet Earth and into space.
There was a vision, a long-term vision humans had of exploring and going beyond, higher, farther, faster. There was the technical challenge, there was the scientific interest, there was the adventure, and there was just simply the demonstration of managerial and organizational and industrial economic competence in a world that was contested. So that was Skylab.
Throughout the 1960s, they looked at a number of different ways in which you could take the Apollo materials, particularly Saturn V and the Apollo spacecraft, and do space station-like things with them. So by the end of the 1960s, 1969, right after the successes on the landing of the moon, attention turns to the space station program, and Skylab is really born there, being the program for human spaceflight during the early 1970s, and to build our basis for experience, and to address those important questions that we had, which were, could humans physiologically adapt to long periods of space? Early 1973, we get ready to launch Skylab. The Skylab Saturn V is sitting on one launch pad of the two launch pads we had for the Apollo program. Skylab is sitting on one launch pad, and just a little ways away on the other launch pad is this Saturn I vehicle with the command and service module, because Skylab launches one day, and the vehicle with the first crew was supposed to launch the next day.
3, 2, 1, 0, and we have a liftoff. The Skylab lifting off the pad now, moving up.
Unfortunately, when Skylab, the laboratory, goes up, the micrometeoroid shield that was on it that also provided heat protection for the vehicle rolls back, jams into the solar arrays. That there are two big 5 kilowatt each solar arrays that we're supposed to deploy. Skylab gets in orbit, it's crippled. And we're in big trouble because Skylab needs that energy from those big solar arrays to operate and for the mission to be successful. And in 10 days, they quickly come up with a plan. We had people sew together a parasol sunshade that they could erect outside the station. They came up with some equipment that the crews could use to try and unstick the giant solar array that was stuck. And Pete Conrad and his crew, the first Skylab crew, go launch 10 days later and save the entire program. The $2.5 billion program would have gone down the drain if the crew hadn't gone up there and saved the mission.
Okay, we're free. We got 0.4 of a foot per second, Houston. Roger. Bye-bye, Skylab.
The story of the launch of the Skylab Orbital Workshop is one of those great triumphs of things going bad and engineers and humans and astronauts working together to fix them.
They have a very successful, almost month-long mission, and proved that, in fact, first, that the Skylab will work, that humans are really important to those things, and they get a lot of good scientific data. And of course, we had 2 more crews that launched later in the year. The second Skylab crew goes up for a longer period and does lots of Earth science experiments, lots of solar observations. And then the third crew finally launches at the end of 1973 and early into 74. They're up for almost 3 months. And they observe, do solar observations, do more Earth observations. We do experiments with students. The first NASA student experiments go on during Skylab. The last crew leaves Skylab in early 1974, so a very successful program overall, despite the fact that it almost, on the first minute of operations, almost went in the drink.
One of the real triumphs of Skylab is that it basically took a situation gathering both the limits of what was possible and the possibilities presented by incredible technological developments and put them together in a program that produced tremendous benefits in science, education, what spaceflight is all about. So it's a stepping stone. It was the stepping stone between the Apollo program and then later definitions of what spaceflight would mean for the United States.
Skylab is the first step. We learn how to operate in space. We build on that with the ISS. We now go on further beyond low Earth orbit to visit an asteroid and then onto Mars. That's the plan, and that's where we're going.
All right, so Skylab being well, quite literally, it was actually a Saturn rocket propellant tank. I wasn't saying gas tank in a joking fashion. It literally was a gas tank in space. But aside from that, another little interesting note about Skylab, it's the one and only American space station to ever exist. It's sometimes a little bit difficult to sit down and actually think about, but Skylab quite literally is the only space station America ever had. We have gone to Mir, we go to the ISS, but we've never had any space station that is strictly American outside of Skylab. So it makes Skylab kind of special and pretty interesting in that facet, knowing that during the exact same amount of time from 71 on to 86, the Soviet Union had put up multiple Soyuz stations, I believe 5 in total. I could be wrong on that. I'm not sure. I think it was 5 functional stations that the Soviets put up. Like I say, I could be wrong though. But all of that leading into Mir, and Mir's absolutely amazing. I don't think it gets the credit that it should just because of the fact that the ISS does exist now, but the Mir space station, for its time, when it was launched in 1986, well, its first segments launched, becoming one of the first objects in space that was a multinational collaboration towards the end of its life. The Mir space station was an absolute triumph to human engineering, human will, and our ability to sit down and get work done. If there's any other way to say it, I'm not sure, but it was the best way of getting work done, getting things moving and happening. And when it comes to space stations, Mir outlived its own life by a factor of 2. It was supposed to be around for maybe 5 years, and it went from, 86 to 2001? Mir is an absolutely phenomenal piece of human engineering. The thing almost burnt to the ground. I don't know how you burn to the ground in outer space, but it almost did. It was growing bacteria that is not from Earth. It was awesome. I don't know how how many of our viewers were around to remember watching what was taking place on Mir, but I was there. I was watching this stuff on PBS and Nova and National Geographic, and it was just outstanding what was taking place back then. And with the fall of the Soviet Union, obviously it was a little difficult to keep certain programs running, but with not immediately trying to go, hey, let's go to the moon, let's work on building space stations, doing scientific research in low Earth orbit, sending people into low Earth orbit repeatedly. Well, the Soyuz program obviously is how we still get to the International Space Station this very day. So it seems to be a huge success, in my opinion. I'm sure some people disagree. I don't really care. It is a huge scientific success. And unfortunately, that might be coming to a close sooner than it should be, but hopefully not. There are obviously other programs out there, the yeah, I don't need to get into future missions. That's not what the show's about, so I'm going to stop myself on that one. But Mir was a absolutely amazing endeavor. It paved the way for things like the International Space Station, and China's hot on the heels of it with was it Tigon? I don't know if I never know if I say anything Chinese properly. I think it's Tigon, but anywho, we do have some fun little clippets here from Mir, so I'm not trying to make tongue twisters. It just happens sometimes. So, Sai, why don't you go ahead and roll them before I start getting myself confused?
Okay. Okay. Here comes Mir.
The Mir space station is no more, but until recently, this floating constructor set was the pride of Russia. One person fortunate enough to experience life aboard Mir before its ultimate demise was American astronaut Jerry Lineker, who conducted a tour of the aging spacecraft. As crew physician, Jerry began with the medical console which he used to monitor the health of his fellow astronauts. He was able to test blood pressure, get hemoglobin counts and EKG readings, which were all sent via telemetry to the surgeon at Mission Control. To warm up meals aboard the station, canned foods were slotted into this cooker device for around 5 to 10 minutes. With the door closed, the crew were able to use the unit as a makeshift dining table. A second oven device, shaped like a small suitcase, was strapped to the ceiling so as not to get in the way. On the other side of the food preparation area was the commander's post, manned at the time by Russian mission commander Vasily, who controlled the station's flight path, main life support systems, and communications. While the commander kept a close eye on his scope and computer monitors, his main concern was a warning alarm panel to his left. Lineker explained that in his 4.5-month stay aboard Mir, they'd seen enough flashing lights on the warning panel to last a lifetime. Jerry now heads towards one of the last US modules added to Mir, called Feroda, or Module E. Most of the life science and microgravity equipment was housed here, so that the American astronauts could conduct their experiments aboard the station. Each module carried its own space fire extinguisher, which looks and works a little differently to those used on Earth. But fortunately, they do the same job. Oxygen breathing devices were also stored nearby. Both items came in very handy when a fire broke out aboard the station. Towards the end of the Feroda unit was another smaller module, but a strange thing happened whenever an astronaut entered this back room. The unit was on a 90-degree angle, so what was once the floor suddenly became the wall, and vice versa. Zero gravity, they discovered, does allow for some very unusual architecture in space. Perhaps even stranger than the room itself was what was stored inside. Thousands of little black beetles needed for a series of scientific experiments. Jerry and the crew joked that the only thing they feared more than a fire was for all those beetles to escape.
Oh my God,
was
space
the
beetles would be
airlock
terrible.
module, which was identical to the primary airlock, so it could be used in case of emergencies. An astronaut entered this room prior to a spacewalk and uses this equipment to go from station power to suit power. The controls allow an astronaut to open and close the depressurization valves, to connect suit tubes in order to get pressure to the suit, and remove much of the moisture that built up during the EVA. This unit was the spacesuit cooling system. An astronaut basically plugged these tubes into the suit to get cool air blowing into it. Exercise is very important on long trips in space, so Mia had 2 treadmills to help keep crew members fit. The control panel only ever offered 2 settings, sprint or walk. And as Jerry warned, when you hit sprint, you'd better be ready to run. The space bathroom was as small and as compact as the rest of the station, which is a fairly apt description for the space toilet as well. The cover lifted up, and solid waste was stored in a container at the base of the unit until it needed to be replaced by an unfortunate crew member. And finally, if things ever got too scary, there was always the Soyuz rescue vehicle for a quick escape, an option that many a Mir astronaut was believed to have considered, especially in the last few years of the faltering station's existence.
Well, there you go.
Exactly. I know Mir caught on fire. I know that there were certain times where there was definitely impending doom, and that had to have been absolutely terrifying. I honestly can't imagine being in that kind of a situation, but
Well, they're not the only one. They're not the only ones that had issues this year. What was it? Was the atmosphere in Skylab like toxic? Had to come up with some pretty serious air filtration.
indeed,
Upon launch,
I remember that.
upon launch, the plastic. Let's see, not out. There's another word for it. The not off gassing. NASA calls it the gases given off by the plastics and stuff of that sort.
Yeah.
Things happen in space.
Yeah, when you haven't been there, you don't necessarily know what's going to happen once you get there. It
Which,
happens, I guess. Oh. So obviously, going on the historical motions of the awesome fun that space stations are, moving right along from Salyut to Skylab to, well, there was obviously a lot more Salyuts, and if anybody wants, I definitely suggest taking a look at Curious Droid's channel. He has done an amazing job at doing some compilation work showing some of the some of the more difficult failures that the Salyut program underwent, and it's truly unfortunate that there were lives lost, and with all things space related, there's going to be lives lost, and it is very unfortunate when it happens, more so when they wind up back on Earth. Yeah, that was some rough chapters in space travel and spacefaring adventures, but like I say, Curious Droid has done an absolutely phenomenal job on putting some great videos together in those regards. So if you're interested, I suggest checking out his channel and seeing what he's already compiled, because it's surprisingly difficult to find good information on the Salyut program. what can I say? It was the era. Yep, sometimes it takes a few tries to get the right word out. Anywho. So, moving on from Mir, flying from 86 to, I swear it was 2001 that Mir was decommissioned. Again, I could be wrong. I do a lot of this off the top of my head, so if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'm really not that concerned. It's not that big of a deal.
And not to mention, anybody, feel free to correct us anytime you notice any of us saying anything incorrect. By all means.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If I'm wrong, call me out by all means. I am totally fine with that. The best way to learn is to find out that you're wrong. So, by all means. So...
You had a tour of the Mir space station queued up as well. Did you want to do that one?
I completely forgot about that one. Let's absolutely do that, because that video is surprisingly difficult for me to find, and it's really good. So,
Steve says Mir was 1986 to 2001. There we go.
I thought I was. All right, thank you, Steve. Oh, and by the way, hopefully, if skies are good, I saw your video earlier, Stephen. I will do what I can to assist in any lunar photography needs that you happen to have. With that said, let's go ahead and roll Mir.
All right. Here comes the tour of Mir.
Here we are in the Cristal module, and you see the air hoses that provide ventilation, very important in zero gravity not to have dead spots, and we can reroute these hoses as necessary to change the airflow depending where the hot and cold spots are in the vehicle. That's a yellow oxygen tank you just saw on the left. There's a spacesuit on the right. This is a storage area, and you can see that we have to transfer all the 9,000 items down this corridor to get into the rest of the Mir space station. It's not very wide. There's the area I slept in above. We pull ourselves with sets of these bungees. You see that black bungee on the top. So we have prepared this area before the shuttle docked and cleared it. It's actually much more crowded than this during actual life. Storage lockers on the left, panels on the right. There are systems and storage behind all these panels. There's the treadmill above. That's really the floor. You might say we were upside down. We're approaching the node, the main node to which all the modules, 6 main sections of the station are attached. Now we're turning, literally turning, rolling into the base block. These modules are attached, so orientation is not necessarily the same in each module. And there's Andy, and we're spending our time transferring information. I'm making sure he knows where things are and giving him the tips I've learned in 4.5 months in space. And here we've turned to the Perota module. It's our main laboratory. It's mostly packed up at this point. I'd spent the last 2 to 3 weeks packing up items. So final preparations. There's the computer, very important, as many purposes for a laptop on orbit, including watching videos, which I had some, not much time to watch. But they were interesting as they impacted me strongly as an attachment to Earth.
Well, there you go.
Yep, that one ends a little abruptly, but, you know.
We got the tour. I'm happy.
Right? I mean, Mir was, it was enormous. When you actually consider the number of payload missions to get all of it into low Earth orbit, Mir was a huge thing. It would have been pretty cool if it could have been tied into its big brother, the ISS, but yeah, not everything works out that way. And fun fact, actually, with Mir, the very first portion of Mir was actually still part of the Salyut program. So before it was actually Mir, it was still a part of the Salyut space station program. So that's kind of cool.
Indeed.
Well, obviously, there's one gigantic thing hovering through the sky that you just can't leave out if you're going to talk about any of this. It's obviously our primary orbital laboratory and long-term friend in the night sky. Obviously, many of individuals have caught it transiting the sun, transiting the moon. I've filmed it from my backyard. I can't even name all the people that have sat down as amateur astronomers and have filmed it, but clearly the ISS is, at this point in time, the pinnacle of space stations that have ever existed. The thing is enormous. And if you think taking a tour of Mir is a decently length video, taking a tour of the ISS is unparalleled. And everything that the ISS has actually contributed to science, to helping nations work together towards one specific actual goal of the betterment of humanity, the exploration of scientific interests, it has been a monumental tool in that factor. And it's so sad that when I sit down and I try and gather information for, fun scientific videos of the ISS, since I'm also obviously on some Friday night hilarities every time I punch ISS into any sort of a search engine anymore. I get a whole bunch of flat earther BS, and it's really a shame because there is so much awesome taking place.
Indeed.
It's kind of a bummer that I've looked at so much flat earther idiocy just to debunk them and screw with them and leave comments that they would actually have to go out into the real world and do some sort of science in order to answer. If I just punch in ISS anymore, all I get is flat earth mumbo jumbo, and it's pathetic. But every now and then you are able to actually get one of the good videos out of the many others, and it happens to be one of my favorite tour of the ISS, because the space shuttle was still, I believe it was Endeavour that was docked with the ISS during this filming, but obviously with the space shuttle no longer flying, with the Buran having never actually made it into being a serviceable piece of equipment, even though it did fly, it flew, it went to space, it landed, it was a successful endeavor. The Buran should have, in my opinion, continued, but the Soviet Union was collapsing and failing, and that's life. Again, there's many videos on that as well. Search them out, but yes, the USSR had a space shuttle just like the United States. They just weren't able to keep it running as a space shuttle. It had a flight, and the other, I think 3 or 4 that they built are just kind of sitting around dry rotting into the earth. But anywho, aside from that, this little video of a tour on the ISS, because certain things with space stations, I just can't sit down and talk about all of the awesome that they are, because you just have to watch it. You do have to just see it. I can't describe what it's like to be there, obviously. I'm not an astronaut. But everybody loves space. So I say we take a tour of the ISS.
All right. And so we shall. Here we go.
in the Soyuz. Jeff Williams behind the camera. We're aft of the service module on the very back end of the station. We're going to transit all the way through to the shuttle, show you everything from one end to the other. Here we go. Now we're into the service module. The very aft end of the Russian segment. See a lot of the gear, the computers, cameras on the walls. We'll continue forward now. Our next stop will be the first juncture in the Russian segment, where we'll look down first.
I just gotta say, I would be totally fine if one of those astronauts wanted to drop one of those telephoto lenses my way.
There at the bottom. If you look up now, you'll see the brand new Russian segment, the MRM-2, the science module. Got a little bit of gear packed in it for the transit uphill, and they're starting to put it into work now. We're going to turn around. Jeff's taking the lead, and we're in the FGB. A lot of cargo stored in the FGB. A lot of stuff. There's food, storage, some scientific material, stuff behind the walls, of course stuff on the floor here. Little mirror here, place where you can clean up, take a bath. And now we're in the next juncture where we look down into the other Soyuz that is attached. At the very juncture between the FGB and Node 1. Jeff's backing up now into Node 1. Through some more storage area in this PMA-1, this mating adapter. And now we open up into Node 1. You can see Roman here. He's working on A-Red.
Hey, this is me.
And we'll turn around the other way.
Speed limit sign.
You can see Randy, Bobby, and Mike working, doing some EMU reconfig. Continuing into the lab. Say hi, Frank. Hello, everybody. Commander. ISS Commander. Hello. Frank DeWin. Robotics workstations. Cephas, basically a bicycle. Station potty.
Okay, Swanee, I'm with you on page 2, right? And
coming on
Randy's
through.
here now as well.
Well, there's Bob first. In the flesh. Sitting here in Node 2.
Bobby's column.
Coming up Node 2, of course, a connection for various parts of the station. We'll look this way. into Columbus, you can see the station spacewalking suits, the EMUs, are stashed there on the ceiling, some more storage on the floor. Japanese experimental module, the GEM, with another sleep station on the floor, other things stored here and there. A working laboratory. Come on, we're into the shuttle now, through the primary abating adapter. Making the 90-degree turn. Now we're on the middeck. There's our commander, Charlie Hallbaugh, Scorch. And now we're continuing up to the flight deck. See the flight deck? Commander seat, pilot seat. We got a couple of seats removed here in the back that we'll have for entry. And then we'll look out the overhead window at station. We certainly hope you've enjoyed your tour from Soyuz to shuttle. Thanks for all the great work everybody's doing on the ground supporting us. Thank you.
Well, obviously, since the time of that particular video, the ISS has grown even more extensive than it was. It's just mind-blowing to think of how large that craft actually is. It's unbelievable. And for being the pinnacle of space station technology that we have this day and age, I'm not disappointed in any way, shape, or form with the ISS. I would love it if we had significantly larger orbital scientific research centers. I would also think we, at this point in time, should have been to Mars, but, you know, I'm one of those people that would gladly give 30% of my paycheck to NASA if it meant that we were actually going to do something decent in this world as opposed to what's happening. Anywho, that's another story for another day.
That's you know, I mean, the equipment is great. The ISS itself is great. What folks do there is the other half of it is also just amazing. I mean, some of the minor things. One of the launches I actually went to was what was it, CRS-5, I think. It's orbital ATK, and they had two of the things that just stuck in the mind. They're not big things for experiments that were being done, but they were interesting and have value. One of them was I don't know if anyone has heard of this. They did a rather interesting experiment with well, fire, really, and how to control and that sort of thing. That it had to be done in microgravity. Well, not had to be. It was done in microgravity because you could do things you cannot do here on Earth, obviously. And it was quite an interesting thing to see. And the other benefit of it, and hopefully there'll be more of this, you know, moving forward, is the education value. The other thing that went up with that particular resupply mission was, believe it or not, one of those. Have you seen those little orb robots from Sphero? They made one that was programmable by students, and a bunch of students wrote programs, and they were run on the ISS. And I'm.
It sounds very.
Yeah.
There's a very good chance I did actually see it, and
yeah, it's the only.
When you're a geek and you watch way too much space traffic stuff,
it all mixes together.
It's like, wait, which launch was that one? I can't remember. Was it?
Indeed, but yeah, that is one of the I mean, yes, they're doing research on heart cells in microgravity. That's going to be a tremendous help to a lot of people and things like that.
Indeed.
But the Sphero thing, getting students involved with something that's going on in space, where they're actively, writing programs and having it run on the space station, on this device, they're going to be ambassadors for the space program going forward as they grow up. You can't.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, you can't forget that you caused something to happen in space. So.
Oh yeah, and that's already actually taken place since Skylab, when, from one of the earlier videos that we watched and from my own growing up in this era. We got to write letters to astronauts on Skylab. That was a thing. It was a thing for a very, 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 very short amount of time, but then it switched over to, hey, you get to write letters to astronauts on the space shuttle. And then you got to email an astronaut or a cosmonaut on Mir. It was this thing that just kept going, where you got to talk to these people, whether your letter or your email or whatever was ever answered, whether your question was ever actually something that they sat down and looked at. It entertained an entire new level of education and wonder and awe that hadn't existed before. We wanted to get to space. We knew we could get there. And then we got there. And those people got to share that with the rest of the world. They didn't hide it. They didn't run away into the shadows and, oh my gosh, this is all a bunch of, no, it's not bull, it's not malarkey. It actually is a real thing, and they share it with you. And it's awesome.
Indeed. And if any of you know any ham operators, you can talk to them. There's always a ham on duty. There's been one on every shuttle flight. And
everyone, indeed.
And there's the ARIS program, which is amateur radio aboard the ISS, and it's on now. They're busy, and they're not always just standing around for a call. But if you want to talk to an astronaut, it is entirely possible. And Andy, you mentioned looking up and seeing the, seeing you can see the ISS overhead. Embarrassingly enough,
I've filmed it from my backyard. It's
the last time I had just a naked eye viewing of the thing was actually at before the same launch I was just telling you about, and it was all of us. It was pointed out by none other than Kay Heyer, who's been there and who's
nice,
who's flown in a shuttle. And that was the time I told you about before, that when she was talking to me, all I could think was, with as much as you've accomplished in your life, why would you even speak to someone at my level? That was all I could think of. You've been there. But anyway, I still get all happy thinking that I actually talked to an astronaut.
That's one of those awesome things that I've always loved about people in the scientific community. It doesn't matter where you're at within the scientific community. Being a part of it means you're a part of it. And every PhD I've ever met, every PhD I've ever talked to, every master's I've met and talked to, every bachelor's I've met and talked to, associates, it doesn't matter. People involved in the scientific community will always sit down and take the time to talk with you about whatever it is. There's a reason why we battle idiots on the flat earth community sometimes. I don't want to bring that into this show, but it's here no matter what. And there's a reason why you can sit down and run into an astronaut on the street. it's never actually happened to me, but you can actually run into these people and you can have a conversation with them. You can run into a physicist that works at CERN and just have a conversation. There's no hoit and toit. There's no I'm better than you. There's that just doesn't exist in the world of science. There's, hey, check this out. It's awesome. Here's how we know it's awesome. You want to learn this? Because I want to help people learn this. It's great. The scientific community is the absolute best community of human beings that I could ever imagine being around.
Quite true. And
I've never had an individual in the scientific community balk at me or act as though, you're not good enough to know this. No, it's education, it's the sharing of knowledge, it's science is awesome, and that's all there is to it.
Absolutely. And I could, and what you just mentioned about those who've taken the trouble to learn enough about their specific field and do enjoy sharing it, and not from a lording it over on you standpoint, exactly as you said. I mean, hell, they studied it because they like it, I believe. But in addition, the only space agency I can obviously comment on that any experience with is our own NASA over here, and they're doubly willing to share because the entire agency, one of their mandates when they were formed was to share information with the public. Everybody
Indeed.
there, everybody is willing to talk to you, and they will talk understandably. They will not throw a bunch of unexplained technical terms at you. I'm not saying they won't use the technical terms, because you must in some cases, but they won't. They do not leave you hanging. They'll. Of course, the trick then is being able to ask the right questions. And like when I was talking to John Mather, all I could think of, I wanted to ask a good question, but all I kept thinking was Nobel Prize. You got the goddamn Nobel Prize. But
I can't imagine sitting down with a Nobel laureate and having a conversation. Someday I will cause that interaction with people to happen, and I will talk to a Nobel laureate.
And it's fortunately I did get past that, and even someone at that level who was at the time overseeing the Webb telescope while it was still at Goddard. Same thing.
I can't wait for Webb.
Oh yeah, me too.
Can you imagine being one of the engineers that actually built the thing, sitting around going, okay, my job ended 5 years ago, and it's going to be another 5 years before it launches. Please make it go faster now. Oh my God.
Now,
I'm a bystander, and the itch is in my neck. I want it to launch. I want it to go.
Yeah, what are we going to learn?
I can't imagine being one of the developers, one of the engineers working on that project, and knowing what it's going to be able to shed light onto. And oh my gosh, I couldn't handle it.
Indeed. But it's, here's something. I certainly hope the unfolding process, the whole origami theory behind it. I certainly hope that's fairly quick process, because I know people like you and I, and probably most of the folks that are in the chat that have joined us, are going to be holding their breath during that period. Please unfold. Please unfold. Please unfold.
Oh yeah.
Because there's no backup. Fortunately, we can't run into even if mistakes were made with the mirrors, which they're not going to do that again. Trust me.
That mistake was made once, but
even
when you're going out to Lagrange point, there's no
there's no plan B.
Well, first off, we don't even have a shuttle program anymore, so that's out of the air. I don't think a Dragon capsule's gonna be rated for human activity before then. I'd like to think it would be, but it just doesn't seem to be happening, and especially all the way out to L2? No. No.
Well, look at the bright side. We say there's no plan B because there's no actual plan B, right? There's nothing. We can't fly up and fix it in a hurry. But the good thing is, the James Webb Telescope itself has a lot of built-in plan Bs, like all the mirrors are adjustable. So
yeah, there's
only thing there's no plan B for.
There's enough technology and learned mistakes from the past that everything should go very smoothly, but it is definitely a little bit worrisome knowing where it's going. People have never been.
Yeah, the combination of where it's going and that whole origami thing. I'm not kidding. If you get word, if you get word that I'm unconscious, that's why, because it took too long to unfold. Anyway, anyway. And on that note, back to you, Andy.
Well, at this point, I think we've effectively eclipsed all space station stuff. I almost had an inkling of showing some some transits of the ISS from various individuals that I know have viewed the show, but without prior permission, I do not like using other people's work when it comes to just generalized, hey, look at this awesomeness. Yeah.
Agreed.
But otherwise, I think that's about it for Sunday Science this week. We just don't have any more space stations yet.
Yet.
There is the Chinese space station, the Tiangong. I really don't know a lot about it, and probably should sit down and do some more research about it, because I just don't know enough about it to have it be part of this episode.
I think Steve asked a question a while back. Is there a next space station plan? Because eventually we're going to run out of lifespan of the ISS. And I answered no.
I don't know of any that are in the works.
It just occurred to me now that I might have been thinking that I might have answered that too quickly from a biased standpoint. When he asked that question in the chat, I immediately snapped to NASA. It doesn't have to be NASA. So you haven't heard of anything going on in the other than the Chinese work going on for anything new?
No, outside of China and their work, I don't know of anything.
Okay.
It seems kind of odd, actually, to not know what's next on the platter.
There's a lot of that.
I don't think that's actually happened yet in my lifetime.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on these days, and there's a lot of things that should be addressed that aren't being addressed, and things that were going to be addressed that were now put on the back burner. Like the ability to save the planet from an incoming nasty object. We'll do that later, apparently.
Yeah, right. Who cares about it until it happens?
Yeah. Well, anyway.
Well, actually, yeah. But yeah, I'm not actually entirely sure what the future of space station holds for us. It's kind of an open air. That's actually funny.
I see what you did there.
I didn't even mean to do it. It just happened. It's an open subject. I'm not entirely sure where it's going to go. I hope that nations continue to collaborate with one another and we work towards the betterment of scientific research and humanity, because that's the kind of person I am. So that's where I'm just going to keep hoping things go. If they don't, they don't. If they do, awesome.
Indeed. And my answer in the chat was, if there is one, I want to see rotating sections. There's all this great concern, and there should be great concern about living in microgravity too long. The change in pressures, increased pressures in the eyes specifically, causing vision problems and things of that sort. And right now they have to come up with ways to minimize that, because we have no artificial gravity, nothing of that sort. And so, you know what I want to see? Rotating sections.
Right. I'm still really interested to see what does an actual lack of gravity, because of course we haven't left Earth's orbit as far as humankind is concerned. We've gotten to the moon. Moon's in Earth's orbit.
Still in Earth's orbit. Yep.
We've built space stations, from a giant fuel tank floating in space to absolutely unbelievable science meccas of space stations. But we have not, as far as the human figure, as far as the human being is concerned, we have not ever experienced actual no gravity. We've only experienced microgravity, the gravity of the Earth, gravity of the moon, and that weird twisted place in between where we're kind of falling and feel weightless. But what does an actual lack of gravity in interstellar space do? What happens then?
It's my recommendation we avoid that at all costs. And I'm not going to say I'm not going to say rotating sections again, but rotating sections.
Yeah,
doesn't have to be huge.
I'm guessing it's not something that we want to touch on.
No.
Aside from that, I do have. It is about time that I start cooking my what will be leftover meals for the week. So I really appreciate every one of you joining us for Science Sunday, and I'm glad that you were here. I hope you enjoyed. It's about that time, though, where I do need to start going and making my dinner, because I like to eat.
Absolutely, and so you should. And actually, we would have been done on time had I not babbled on for so long. My apologies.
You're fine, Sci Strikes.
All right.
Well, and half of science is babbling. If you don't sit down and discuss what it is that's taking place, how are you going to learn what it is that's taking place?
Agreed. Well, I've got nothing else. You have anything else, Andy?
No, I think that about wraps it up for today.
All right. Well, good evening, all. Nice seeing you all here again. Any newcomers?
Indeed. Thanks for joining us, everybody, and I hope you enjoyed another fun episode of Science Sunday.
I know I did. Oh, and everybody, once again, if you want to communicate with any one of us at any time, we do have the Discord server. It's in the video description. So, on that note,
awesome.
Nice job.
I completely forgot about the Discord.
Indeed. Nice
that
job.
is brand new, though. So.
Yeah. We just started it. It was recommended. Believe it or not, somebody on our Facebook, the Science Strike Force Facebook page, recommended that we do that. So anyway,
very cool.
All right. Well, nice work, young fella, and we'll be talking soon.
All right. Sounds good. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Yep. Bye, all. Oh, I saw David in the chat.
He was there for a minute.
Yes. Biggles is new. And we're used to seeing Darren. And we're used to seeing Malcolm.
Okay, I do have to ask, is Darren as a graduate the same Darren that used to be on movie night when it first started?
You know, that's a question I never asked. You realize we just went past closing it. All right. Good night, all. Have a nice evening.